Hello, this is Dr. Kamani, licensed clinical psychologist. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to my channel, Lifting As We Climb Consulting, Wellness Services, where we focus on supporting the healing of us individually and collectively. So thank you for tuning in. We've been having conversations for a number of months now, talking about the experiences of Black women and toxic, really focusing on healing. So I'm bringing on different guests to share their experiences of being in a toxic work environment, and also to talk about healing, because we want to emphasize that healing is possible. Okay, we want you to remember that. And we also don't want anyone to feel like they are alone. You are not alone. Many of us have experienced toxic work environments, and we do make it through. But it's important for us to acknowledge the harm, and so that we can get the healing we need, right? So I want to welcome our guest today, Dr. Jacqueline Benson. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Benson. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the conversation.
Okay, of course. So my name is Dr. Jacqueline Benson. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I am currently part of a group practice called Deeper Than Color. We are a telehealth practice based out of Oakland, all clinicians of color, and we specialize with working with clients who identify as people of color. And I also am the founder of an organization called Center Stage Psychology. And so we specialize in working with performing artists. I'm a performing artist myself. I grew up doing music, playing the cello, and now I work in musical theater. So I also work with artists and performers around their mental health as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just want to tell the audience briefly how I met Dr. Benson. We were participating in a conference, and I noted that I'm doing work in relation to Black women in toxic work environments. And she and I connected along with another Black woman, and we are presenting this summer at the American Psychological Convention on Black women in toxic work experiences. So Dr. Benson is one of my co-presenters. So again, welcome today. So Dr. Benson, can you share with the audience about an experience, a toxic work experience that you've had?
Yeah, sure. I've had a few as a Black woman, but some that stand out to me when I was in my grad program for psychology. The
Mhm.
first year that I went into the program, I was doing a training placement in a center where the focus of the work was doing ABA with kids who have autism, and that was part of like my early training. And
Mhm.
when I first went in, I had experience working with kids who have special needs, but I had never done any ABA. I had never
Mhm.
had specific training around that modality. And it was my
Mhm.
first year of my grad program. So I was feeling extremely vulnerable around that. I was going into this
Mhm.
program to become a psychologist. And when I started there, I thought, I'm a first year trainee. I'm sure I'm going to
Mhm.
get a lot of support around
Mhm.
doing things that I've never done before, learning about
Mhm.
something new. That really was not the experience. I did
Mhm.
not feel supported at all in this environment. I had a supervisor who was connected to my school just because she was providing supervision, and she
Mhm.
never met with me in person. So
What?
yeah,
Wow.
that was the first red flag. We were
And this
always
was pre-pandemic, right?
this is pre-pandemic. Yeah, this is like
Right.
way back in like 2012. So she
Wow.
speaking with me over the phone. Me being a first year, I'm of course thinking I don't know how this is supposed to go or what this is supposed to
Right.
be. Um, I did have an on-site supervisor, but he was also someone who provided ABA services. So he had his own caseload. He was part of that
Hmm.
organization. So there wasn't as much time to meet with me, to support me around the work that I was doing,
Hmm.
or if I had any questions that they were answered. So really, I think the biggest struggle in that environment was this lack of
Hmm.
support that I was receiving, like really from day one.
Wow.
And then my supervisor just really not being available to me, and not ever making the time to meet with me in person. So
Wow.
eventually I made the decision to leave that placement and go somewhere else where I knew I was going to have in-person supervision. And
Hmm.
when I told my supervisor about the decision to leave the placement, she told me, well, if your next training placement doesn't work out, you'll know that you're the problem.
What?
That was what I was told verbatim.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You're the problem.
Yeah. As a first year trainee, never having supervised
Wow.
before. Yeah. So that was definitely like the first
So,
time.
so no attempt whatsoever to just investigate what you said, try to give you support. You must be the problem if it happens again.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the decision
How
for
did
me.
that impact you, Dr. Benson?
Oh
Hearing that.
yeah. Oh, I remember actually, I mean, this is one of those things I like vividly remember being on the phone, having that conversation with her, leading up to the decision to leave. It was hard for me because I had been there for several months. So I had built a
Mm,
caseload. I had some families that I was working with doing ABA with their
mm,
children. And
mm-hmm,
I actually quite enjoyed working with my clients. And so I
mm,
had gotten close to the families. So it was hard
mm-hmm.
for me to decide that I wanted to leave. Um,
Right.
and it was really just purely based on needing more supervision and support around the training. So
Mm-hmm.
when I had that conversation, I was already kind of emotional, tearful. I'm deciding to leave. And once she said that to me, I was devastated. As a first
Yeah.
year, asking myself, like, should I be going into mental health? Should I be a therapist?
Right.
Is this for
Right.
me? Like all kinds of questions about my capabilities and whether or not I should be doing it. I remember just like calling my mom and crying, to be honest. I was
Oh, wow.
22 years old when I started my program. And yeah, that was my experience. So it was really damaging. And it is something that stays.
Can I ask you a question real quick? So this person, this that you talked to was a mental health professional, right?
Yes, licensed clinical psychologist.
Right. So that disconnect in terms of the harm that she was causing you, in terms of that insensitivity, which is really disturbing. And, I know that we've noticed that a lot in our field where there's an expectation because someone's a mental health professional that they would know better, they wouldn't treat people like that, they would have some compassion. But
Yeah.
we have come to find out that that's not necessarily the case, right? People are people and hurt people hurt people.
Not at all. And it was interesting when I went into my next placement at a high school, I was in a group supervision with a lot of other folks
Hmm.
who were sharing with me. They were like, oh yeah, I had a really similar experience in my training where I had a difficult super,
Mm,
and they really made me question whether or not I wanted to be in this field. And as I went along in my training, I realized like this was an experience a lot of people were having. Uh,
yes.
but for me, definitely as a Black trainee, I was
Hmm.
extremely affected by being told
Yeah.
maybe this isn't
Yeah.
you. Um,
Yeah. And also, Dr. Benson, just thinking about all that it took as a Black woman to get to where you were at that moment. And then to have someone try to discredit you or question you. And this other person was not Black. Is that correct? Right. So it just brings up all these different things that we experience as Black women. And you kind of just carry that on with you. Even though you've moved on, it still kind of just stays with you.
yes, and I think it was striking in all of the placements that I went to afterwards. What I realized is I really loved working with kids. I liked working with teens
Mm-hmm.
along with my training, but I had a really hard time managing feedback from supervisors moving forward. I was
Hmm.
really like sensitive to feedback. I always tried to take it in, but it was difficult
Hmm.
for me to read my evaluations from that point forward. I
Hmm.
was really worried that they were going to say something along those lines of that first
Hmm.
what that first supervisor said to me. So it
Yeah.
created a lot of anxiety for me in my training that wasn't there before that experience.
Which is crazy. So you were being traumatized in the training process,
Yes.
and then you were being tasked to go then heal and help other people, which is crazy. So how did you heal through that process? Because that sounds very demoralizing.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the big things was talking to other trainees. I think
Hmm.
one of the most important things was being able to talk to other people about what I had experienced and hear about
Hmm.
experiences and really be validated in knowing that like I'm not the only one who has had this really toxic interaction with a supervisor. Talking
Hmm.
to Black clinicians about their experience has been extremely helpful for me, just in terms of building
Mhm.
around this and knowing that
Yes,
this is not just a me issue. And I think that that's
right.
really, really important for Black
Yes,
to have that, the community and the support and the validation to know that, like,
yes.
this is not a you problem.
Right, right. And you know, it's interesting that I think a lot of people don't recognize that within the mental health field and within all fields, there's racism, right? And the person could be white, they could not be white, but there's still that white supremacy within our field, right? And the ways that we've been trained. And so when we go into these fields that we have to encounter so much in terms of our dedication to help and to heal, but sometimes we're being harmed too. So you're talking about you had a network of people that you sought out for support as you were trying to go through the training program. And it just reminds me, Dr. Benson, of when of my earlier graduate school experiences, because I had to end up leaving a graduate school program because it was so horrific, it was so traumatic. And it was in the South, and it was three of us in a class, and the professor, who was not Black, but it was not white either, pulled us aside one day and said, I wanted to meet with you guys in the office. So we met with him, and he said, you know, Black students usually fail this class, so I'm going to make it mandatory for you guys to come to a tutorial session once a week. Right. And so we're all three of us, we're like first year graduate students. We're sitting there thinking, what is happening here? And what was so disturbing, Dr. Benson, is that when we went to other professors within the graduate program, nobody really took it seriously. You know, there was one Black professor, went to him, and he said, oh, he was just joking. He was just joking. And then another one said, oh, you didn't find it helpful what he was doing? So every week we would have to go in, and it literally, Dr. Benson, it was like an oral exam, right? So he's quizzing us on the chapters, and, you know, and it got to the point where, you know, all three of us were together, so we were able to talk about it.
Yeah.
But we recognized that this is wrong, and nobody was standing up for us. So we ended up filing a racial complaint, right? And that was so traumatizing in and of itself. So you're a first year graduate student, filing a racial complaint against this professor. None of the other professors are supportive. And I just ended up leaving the program, but I had invested so much time and energy, and just, you know, graduate programs are not easy. And so it's very hard to get in. And then when you get in, to have that type of experience. And Dr. Benson, let me tell you, that traumatic experience stayed with me for years. And it's only recently when I've been able to say that was wrong. There was nothing wrong with me. That person did wrong, right? So when you think about trauma and that sense of shame, right? Yep. And so, Dr. Benson, I know we also talked about after you left graduate school, you know, what was that like for you after you left graduate school in terms of your professional experiences?
So I left graduate school. I graduated. I got through my training. There were other incidences that came up where, you know, I had difficult supervisors. I had also some positive experiences with supervisors. I had a Black supervisor at one point, and people who were just really supportive of me. And I think that was reparative and healing for me. But once I graduated, my first job, I moved. I was in where I did my postdoc. I stayed and I worked for a little while at the Kaiser, and that was actually really in Walnut Creek, and that was a positive experience. And I moved to California right before the pandemic started. So I moved, it was about a month before the pandemic, and so I accepted a position at a hospital, and they had never had a psych assistant before. So, and it was a new program, and right after I got hired, we went into quarantine.
Wow.
It was very, my position wasn't initially supposed to be telehealth anything. And that was really challenging, and I was going through the pandemic, and it was an assessment-based position. And I feel like there were two female supervisors there. They were both supposed to be supporting me, and they brought on two
Mhm.
other psych assistants as well. Um,
Mhm.
and it was just extremely difficult to get the support and training we needed from our supervisors to do assessment. Yeah, via
That's
tele
crazy.
in a new program. So they were also both, they're not like newly licensed, but a couple years
Mhm.
had their license.
Mhm.
Not think they were equipped to support us as psych assistants. And we had very challenging experiences doing assessments. And yeah, so that was difficult. I made the decision to leave. My coworkers there as well also made the decision to leave shortly after
Mhm.
I started. And it was,
Mhm.
and we had a supervisor who was extremely hard on us. There were there was a mistake, an error made. If you know anything about psych testing, it's really important
Mhm.
that the testing is accurate. And so
Absolutely.
we were doing an assessment that none of us had done before, we weren't familiar with. Yeah,
What?
which shouldn't have been happening.
No.
And so, an error was made. It was handled ethically. It was corrected. All,
Mhm.
but the way that we were treated after the fact was really terrible.
Mhm.
Supportive. So again, it was like, it was myself. One of the other psych assistants was a white male, and the other one,
Mhm.
a Latina woman. So it's just
Mhm.
hard to go through that, even with support, like knowing, oh,
Yeah.
not just a me issue. This is happening to all of us. It was
Yeah.
just to be like, have your competency questioned. This is something we go through, it's like
All the time.
all the time.
Right?
Are you,
Yes.
and are you capable?
Right.
And then when
And I
things,
would say, Dr. Benson, it happens even once we are licensed. There's a question about our competence, even though we had to go through a very rigorous, not only training, but also passing the licensing exam. And so there's still this continual sense of, are you competent? Do you have the skills? But clearly you do. And so it's something that you encounter, or that I know that I encounter many times. I know in my workplace, there were people in my workplace who never acknowledged that I had a doctorate. Never. And not that I would go around and saying I'm Dr. Kamani, but still there was no acknowledgement whatsoever. And so actually there was an attempt to kind of put me in my place, right? So this perception that because I have a doctorate that I must think that I'm better. And so we're going to put you in your place. I remember actually hearing a male colleague say really loud, knowing that I was around, right? I'm the only PhD there, and just said very loud, oh, PhDs are so arrogant. And so just being in situations where people are discounting and discrediting you. And so,
yeah,
Dr. Benson, what has that experience been like for you in terms of what impact have all these experiences had on you?
I think for me, the confidence, it was really always very difficult for me to build up my confidence. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that at this point in my career, my first negative experience was at the beginning. The other one, I had been, seeing clients, practicing. I was right before getting my license, about 6 years, 7 years, I'm seeing clients and I'm going through this. And are you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really hard for me to feel confident in my abilities, despite the fact that I'm seeing clients, I'm helping clients, I've had a lot of successes under my belt.
Yeah.
When these traumatic experiences happen, it kind of takes you back to square one with your confidence.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
am
Yes. Yes.
I belong here? Should I be doing this work? Am I capable of
Mm-hmm.
work? And it's really hard. I think it's particularly damaging when you're not supported in training environments as well.
Right. Absolutely.
There to work and to learn. And if
Yeah.
a lot of toxicity around errors or learning and,
Mm-hmm.
around, well, why don't you know how to do this? It doesn't really put you in the mindset to be successful and to be able to do your
Right.
way that's balanced.
Right. To
Yeah,
learn and to grow, right? And you think about as therapists, we use ourselves in our work. And so why would you want to provide an environment for trainees where they're feeling unsure of themselves? That's not a supportive environment. And also when you think about ethically, they're putting you out there and you're not getting the adequate supervision. So you're doing
Yeah.
testing, you're doing all these other things, and no one is there to fully support you. So, Dr. Benson, can you share with the audience what has been your healing journey from these situations?
So coming out of that job that I spoke about, I went into an IOP program that was challenging. I stayed there for a while,
Can you
and
explain what IOP is for the audience?
yeah, sure. IOP is intensive outpatient. So I was there for a few months. I worked with a team that I actually really loved. They were wonderful.
Hmm.
A lot, and the decision to leave that position really just had to do with the amount of work that I had, and then more so these systemic issues of intensive outpatient
Mm-hmm.
programs in
Mm-hmm.
the U.S., which I will spare everyone today, but really high stress environment. So
Yes.
I had to leave, and I ended up going into working with Deeper Than Color, which is where I am now. So I like that my team is small, and it's also all clinicians of color. So it was a really different experience coming in, because there was just a lot of support and affirmation around the
Mm-hmm.
history of toxic work experiences that I've had in the past, which was not something I had experienced in other places, right? So
Right.
there was a lot of, I had a lot of anxiety around, well, I made the decision to leave these other places because it just wasn't toxic for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I was worried that if I interviewed, they would be like, well, why were you only here for, less than a year, or only here for a year? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Experience that I had with Deeper Than Color, they were like, we understand. And also,
I know that they did.
we understand that like you had work trauma, toxic
Yes.
environments, and we don't need you to explain that, because that's also like gonna bring up a lot in your interview process. Just tell us about who you are as a clinician and what
Awesome.
you do. Yeah. So for me, that was a healing process to really join,
Mm-hmm.
where I felt seen and affirmed, and
Mm-hmm.
support that I'm doing. And it's fun
Yes.
because now I look back at the client work that I did, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
despite these toxic work environments, I was able to see clients. I was able to do good work.
Yes.
Places where I wasn't supported, and it
Yes.
has been kind of a realization for me to come to within myself that like that takes strength and resilience to continue to show up for
Mm-hmm.
when you're not supported yourself. I think
Exactly.
I'm strong in that way, but I was. Um,
Yeah.
Now that I am in a place where I feel seen and I feel supported, I think the quality of my work is much better. Um,
Mm.
and I'm able to really come into spaces like this and talk about my experience,
Yeah.
and kind of put it into perspective. And
Yeah. And it's healing, right? It's healing in the sense of giving your testimony. And that's why like I keep having these conversations because it's fascinating, disturbing, validating to have these conversations because I'm hearing from so many Black women on the interviews, outside of interviews with my clients who are having similar experiences. And it doesn't matter where they are in the country. It doesn't matter what the profession is. And it just keeps happening. And so for me, it's healing because I hear about your healing journey. I hear about other Black women in terms of healing journeys, and it becomes healing for me. And so that's why it's so important. I really wanted to provide a platform for this because I want other Black women to see you are not alone. Other Black women have had this experience. You are not stuck there, even though it feels like you're stuck there. I'm not saying just get up and leave and quit. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is start looking at your options and start preparing and also do things to help you heal in the process. And do not be silenced about your experience. So if you are being harmed, something's hurting you, make sure you find trusted people that you can talk to. If you need to go to therapy, but do what you need to do to take care of yourself, right? Or I saw you laugh.
please go to therapy. I went to therapy when I was working at the hospital, and doing the assessment, as a
Mm-hmm.
site assistant, and going through all of that. I went to therapy. It was extremely important. It was also smack in the middle of the pandemic. So I was going through this toxic work experience, and also it was the pandemic, and I
Mm-hmm.
moved, and there was just a lot on my plate, and I needed space to kind of talk
Yes.
about what I was going through and what I was dealing with. And that was extremely important for me to do at that
Yeah.
time, because a lot of times you can't just pick up and leave your job. If you're in a toxic,
Right.
you can't just
Right.
quit. You gotta pay.
Right. Yeah, so you have to think about self-preservation. So sometimes we feel bad about different things, but we have to think about ourselves too, and how are we really feeling and what impact is this job having on us? So is it affecting us physically? Is it affecting us mentally, spiritually? Are we having difficulty sleeping? Is it impacting our family relationships, our personal relationships? Because this toxicity and this trauma can bleed over to other areas of our lives. And so it's important for us to consider that too.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
And I do see this now in my clinical work. I'm working with Black professional women. Some of them are
Mhm.
toxic work experiences right now. And it's
Mhm.
been really important for me to reflect on my own experiences so that I
Yes.
can use what I've learned in my clinical work to support people who are going through this. And so that
Yes.
has been really validating for me, because hearing
Mhm.
experiences, like you said, it helps me to remind myself that affirmation, like, this is not a me thing. As a Black,
Mhm.
as a young professional, I went into my field thinking, of course, I want to help people. This is going to be a positive experience. I never expected that I was going to have like 3 or 4 toxic workplace experiences.
Wow.
I knew, it's like, as Black people, we know, we're like, okay, I might run into
Yeah. We
racist.
know got to work twice as hard. We know how people might perceive. We know that going into it.
Yeah,
But the degree of toxicity, and especially in the mental health field,
ever. Yeah.
I think it's just like really disturbing when you see just how treacherous sometimes these environments are and just how miserable certain people are in positions of leadership and how they inflict harm on the people doing the work. I think a lot of us are not prepared for that.
No, not at all, especially not in a helping profession. I think
Hmm.
um, Black women have a very complicated relationship with being caregivers and being people who care
Hmm.
for others. And so you're in this position where your job is to help other people. And if you are
Right.
where you're being harmed, it's really
Right.
hard to just
Right.
feel that you feel very depleted and unsupported,
Yes.
but your job is to pour into other people and to give. I think that
Yes.
hard for me to learn how to balance. And I
Hmm.
the reason why being in community with other people and talking
Hmm.
so helpful for me is because that was really where I was being restored. Finding people
Yes.
who would like pour into me and be able to support me while I was going through that, that was
Yes.
important. I reached out to several Black female psychologists while I was working at the hospital. Um,
Hmm.
asked them, are you available for supplemental supervision? For
Hmm.
I really just need support right now. And
Hmm.
all of them got back to me. And I did end up working with 2 of them and
That's
meeting with
awesome.
mental supervision. So I think
Yes.
that's something I can share with people. Like, if you are able to seek professional support outside of your work environment, I think that's
Hmm.
the restorative thing when you're.
Hmm. Absolutely. And, it just speaks to, lifting as we climb, in terms of my business. So these were some psychologists who were already established and they were like, you know what, my sister's having some difficulties. Let me help her into the field. And we need so many more of us in the field. So that's why it was so powerful that they did that, because we need to do all we can to support more Black people in the mental health field, because not enough of us, right? And many of us who, if you get over the stigma of mental health, they want to see a Black therapist.
Yeah.
So we need to do whatever we can to support other Black people coming into the field. And, Dr. Benson, I think we talked about this before too, in terms of, as a graduate student, not really being aware or being prepared in many ways for the racism, the hostility, all these things that we encounter when we go into professional environments. So even in our internship sites or our professional fields, I remember I went to a conference, which was so crazy. The
Yeah.
conference was an African American mental health conference. By this point, I've been a licensed psychologist for a number of years. I go to the area where it says, for your continuing education credits, it says psychologist. It had all the different, areas of specialty around the room. It says psychologist. I go to that area, and the person who was, kind of giving you the paperwork, did not look like me, did not look like us. And literally, Dr. Benson, he questioned me 3 times if I was a psychologist. He said, this is for psychologists. I said, yes. He said, this is for psychologists. 3 different times, right?
Yeah.
So that was like, okay, let me hurry up and get into the conference, whatever. Do you know when I came back to turn in my evaluation, there was a different person there, not Black person. Again, it's a Black conference, right? Not a Black person. And she asked me 3 different times if I was a psychologist. And again, I'm thinking, okay, I can clearly read it says psychologist. I know I'm a psychologist. What I'm lying about an evaluation, but that kind of stuff, that kind of questioning. And I've gone to so many times, different conferences that are not specifically geared towards Black people, maybe a professional conference. And people are looking at me like, what is she doing here? What is she doing here? And so that sense of like questioning doesn't make me feel like I don't belong there. It makes me feel like I don't belong maybe in that particular environment, but I need to continue to be here for my people and just support liberation for our people. And not to be dissuaded by that. But, I would have found it so helpful when I was in graduate school if someone pulled me to a side and said, look, you're getting your degree, you're going to get licensed. Please be aware that some people are not going to respect you. Please be aware that some people are going to question you even more. Please be aware that some people are going to try to put you in your place just because, not even that you're presenting a certain way, but if you have any level of confidence and you present yourself in a way that you know what you're doing, there's even more of an attempt to try to take you down and put you in your place. I would have loved if someone could have talked to me about that, and my hope is that to eventually have a training program and supervision for clinicians of color so that we can have these real talk conversations, because it's hard enough doing the work. But then when you're being put in your place by other people who are intimidated by you, not by anything you've done, but by their own insecurities. So Dr. Benson, did any of that resonate with you in terms of having that experience of not being validated?
Yes, I think it is so important to have spaces for Black trainees who are going to clinical psychology where they can around the racism that they're inevitably going to. They're going to come across it. I underestimated it. Even growing up the way that I grew, like my mom is from this, like I was very aware of, all these dynamics and have to prove myself, but I still feel like I was shocked at every time I came across something that was clearly racism in my training. Need spaces and community where we can talk about this and unpack it together. Put each other around it, like really meaningful and like intentional spaces, because it's not an if, it's a when.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just the reality of it. So
absolutely.
100%.
And Dr. Benson, what's interesting and what's sad about these conversations I've been having with Black women is there's not one toxic work experience, it's multiple ones, right? And so many times if I say, tell me about a toxic work experience you've had, the women are like,
which one?
I mean, like, which one? It's like, it's so many of them. And so I appreciate you and all my guests for coming on and talking about their experiences, because the more we stand up and say, this is not right, this is not okay, we're using our voices to raise awareness about how often this happens for Black women, because we have the highest rates, I think, in terms of experiencing toxic work environments. And so we need to be able to speak up about it, not just say that, we don't want to work. We absolutely want to work. We absolutely want to do what we need to take care of. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that we demand for people to know our worth and treat us with respect, right? Now, even if that might mean doing our own thing, that does not mean that we are averse to working. Okay. I just want to be very clear because we know the stereotypes of Black women, right? Either we're super strong or we're lazy or we have attitudes, like all these different things. And so when we come into the workplace or training sites, we're often very aware of how people might be perceiving us, and we're working to counter that, or we're working so hard so people don't have those stories. But they're going to have them. They already have them.
I mean,
Right?
so striking because one of the things I learned about myself, like I am highly, highly anxious. I deal with a lot of anxiety. And so, I mean, coming into my grad program at 22 years old, I went immediately from undergraduate into my graduate program.
Wow.
I mean, I'm highly driven, really, really anxious. I want to show up. I want to do a good job. I want to do the work.
Yes.
Everything in my history up to that point is reflective of that. And so I had to really remind myself, like, no, you are working hard, because sometimes in those conversations where they were questioning my competency, my work ethic, all of
Mm-hmm.
I was really turning around and being like, well, are they right? You know,
Yes. The gaslighting is horrible.
it doesn't reflect, it doesn't reflect my history. I mean,
Right.
you don't get to this point, and I had to keep telling myself that. And that's the, like, you have to have an affirmation for yourself as you're going through this, because it's like, that does not reflect the reality of my history and where I'm
Exactly. 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 So connecting to reality and also having a good support network around you to say, no, they're acting crazy. That is not you. You have what you need, right? So having other people to validate that too. So Dr. Benson, can you share with the audience what services you offer and how people would be able to access those services?
Yeah, sure, sure. So I see therapy clients through Deeper Than Color. You can find me there at Deeper Than Color. You can find us on Instagram, our website, deeperthancolor.com. And so I'm accepting new clients right now. I see teens, I see adults. And then I also do DEI consultation, and mental health consultation for performing arts organizations. So you can find me at centerstagepsych.com. So there should be a link to my website on my Instagram. You can find us also on Instagram, Center Stage Psychology. And we're all 100% focused on creating mental health resources for performing artists, particularly performing artists of color. And I'm doing some really exciting work with Brown Girls Do Ballet and some organizations that specifically serve young artists of color, because what I experienced in mental health, I also experienced in the performing arts training that I had.
Wow.
I grew up playing the cello, and there's very few Black cellists. So,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
support in that
Yeah.
is the offering
Yeah.
support as well.
Yes. So I'm going to include all your information in the description section on YouTube. But it's interesting too, because you raise up another issue in terms of healing. So you are involved in the arts, and that's been a form of healing as well, right?
Oh, it is so important. It's so important. When I went into grad school in the Bay Area, I moved from LA, where I was playing the cello. I was working as a musician through college. But when I started my grad program, I wasn't performing at all. And I found that to be really hard. And I ended up
Mm.
meeting a community that was really interested in musical theater. I moved to an apartment that's right across the street from Berkeley Playhouse, if anybody knows the Bay Area. And so I ended up auditioning and doing a show there and falling in love with it. I found that I loved musical theater, and I got
Wow.
performing arts, and I've kind of been doing it ever since. That was really how I built a network of friends when I moved, and I didn't really know.
Mm.
I was in this psychology program, and it was really rigorous. But the Bay Area has a very beautiful and thriving and supportive arts community, a performing arts community. And a lot of the folks who are part of that community, they do performing arts, but they also have day jobs. So who they're doing a musical, but they're also like teachers and
Yeah.
accountants. They work in tech, and I found that space, and it was really important that I got support. And I think a lot of it got me through my program. They
Yeah.
supported writing my dissertation and all kinds of things. So
Yeah.
arts is very important in my life. It still is.
Yeah. Yes. So it's important that we all look at what things give us joy, right? Like what things help us lighten up. And that's something we're going to be talking about coming up soon on this channel in terms of Black women reconnecting to our joy, because we are often seen as like the workhorses and we are the ones to take care of everything. And we have to, have everybody, throw everything on us, but we deserve joy too. And so art, whatever brings us joy, it's important for us to reconnect to that because it's so healing. It's so healing. So thank you, Dr. Benson, for joining us today and sharing your story. And as I mentioned before, when we share our stories, it's healing. It's healing for us individually to tell our stories. And it's also healing to hear other Black women tell their stories. So you know that you're not alone. You are not a victim. The fact that we're still standing here, we are victors. And that healing is possible. I really want everybody to recognize that healing is possible. And I will continue having these conversations. I will not be silenced because we know that, when people try to silence us, that's a form of oppression. And I will not be silenced. I'll just get louder. And so just to remember that. And so Dr. Benson talked about services that she has available. I also have a job coaching program for Black women who are trying to exit out of a toxic work experience, and they need to heal so that they have the clarity in terms of what is it that I'm looking for in my next job, and it's a better fit as they go to another job, right? So even if that might mean doing your own thing, but also reminding us that choice and options are available, even when it seems like it's not, it is. And if you need to seek a therapist, please do so. Please do so. Therapists see therapists too. It's always very helpful, right?
So important.
Yes, so important. Absolutely, absolutely. So again, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And Dr. Benson, you're in California as well, right?
Yes, I see clients in California. I have quite a few clients who are in the Bay Area and also Southern California, where I'm based out of the LA area. So yes, I'm available, and thank you for having me. I think this is such a good topic to talk about. So.
Yeah, and it's so, I think I told you before, but I initially just planned to do this in October for Bullying Prevention Month. And I just got an outpouring of people, Black women, saying, please talk about this more. Please, can you please keep talking about this, right? And so I was motivated to keep doing it. And I realized the more that I did it, the more healing it was for me, because I was able to talk about my toxic work experiences and have a different perspective about it, right? So being able to see that other people have had similar experiences, and the fact that I'm here with you today is a sign that I'm healing, right?
Yeah,
so it's important to keep remembering that.
And that it's really hard to unpack it. Like a lot of times you can't unpack it while you're still in it. And that this is something that, like, once you're out of it, creating the space to really look back and go through it and heal, that's intentional work. So I'm glad that this is part of the process for me, for sure.
Absolutely. And we must remember that as Black people, that joy is a form of resistance. And so how are we reconnecting to our joy? So let us remember that as we go on for the rest of our day. And again, thank you, Dr. Benson, and everyone else. Have a good day. And I hope to see you next Monday for another conversation about supporting the healing of Black women in toxic work experiences. If you want to see the other videos that I've done thus far, please go to my YouTube channel, Lifting As We Climb Consulting Wellness Services, where you can see all the videos. You can subscribe to my channel, share the videos, turn on the notification bell so you know when I post a new video. So again, enjoy your day. And thank you again, Dr. Benson.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.